just interested about the lack of young people who are members of trade unions. I was wondering whether you happen to know what proportion of people who work in call centres belong to a trade union. Because, I mean, my perception is that conditions in call centres are generally not very good, and there's quite often a lot of young people working in those areas.
I don't know the figures, but I would suspect it was very low. It's very low in the private sector. Most of the trade unions that remain, most organised trade unions are in the public sector, or at least in the former public sector. And in the private sector, I think it's 1 in 30% of workers are members of trade unions. I suspect in the private sector, it's probably half of that, or even less than that. So I would imagine that within that, within the young people within the private sector, the percentage, I would be certain, is less than 10%, well less than 10%.
I was wondering whether that might be a way to sort of try to increase membership, trying to get into certain industries where there might be some potential.
We'll take Simone, and then there's a gentleman there, I think, and then this lady.
Yeah, I'm really delighted that the Green Party are taking on the welfare reform campaign. Certainly, a couple of years ago, I was the campaigns and policy worker at the United Kingdom's Disabled Council, and we certainly did some work on the welfare reform bill. So yeah, I'm quite happy. I'm going to say this very tentatively to help out, but I don't want to be writing anything or having kind of input into anything on this, because that would encourage the Green Party to do anything around that welfare reform. That'd be great. One of the big issues around this we need to be thinking about is, you know, the work, sorry, I'm just giving a bit of time. The requirement to work for your benefits after you've been employed for 2 years. Now, if I remember rightly, there was something in there. They also said anybody else who also benefits. So we're going to find there's going to be a lot of slave labour, there's going to be a lot of disabled people. Because it isn't just for people who are unemployed for a year, it's anybody who will benefit. So what you're going to find is you're going to get a whole lot of disabled people who are going to end up, because they're not going to be able to get into paid work, going to end up being exploited by the system. They're going to end up being put onto these work-related systems. Also, we've got to think it in the context of not just only about the government to talk about, you know, wanting to support people into work, but then you've got other pieces of legislation that's going against that. So, for example, you've got the apprenticeships bill at the moment going to Parliament, where they're basically saying that you have to have 5 GCSEs in order to access apprenticeship schemes. Okay, whatever we think about them, you know, it's an option. Some people benefit from apprenticeships. Some people are a bit sceptical what that might mean in terms of pushing people, you know, off benefits. You know, so I understand that, but I do start from the premise that some people, you know, do benefit from apprenticeships, and that the government are looking at saying that you can have 5 GCSEs to get onto the level 2 apprenticeship scheme, apprenticeships. So therefore there's an issue around there. So we need to be looking not just at the welfare reform bill, we're looking at current policies and legislation that will have an impact in supporting disabled people who wish and desire to go to work and desire to get those skills to do so. So I'm not one for not wanting disabled people to get into work. It's a matter of choice to do that. Also, I guess
we've got a few other people waiting.
Another thing you need to be thinking about quickly was the last 2 years ago, the Joint Committee on Human Rights did flag up an issue that the Welfare Reform Act at that time, in terms of what's considered as work-related activity, what's considered as being when you need to decide, when decisions are made about when you go for an interview, whatever. They thought that might be put in the Human Rights Act. They haven't clarified what the conditions would be in practice. So it might be worthwhile having a look at that again in terms of advancing your campaign. Right, okay.
Thanks. Was it gentleman there? You had a question, was you? Gentleman behind the green t-shirt. Do you have a question? No, the lady, was it?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I know somebody over there. Yeah, can you take your question, please?
Yeah, no, I was just going to make a comment about this membership of trade unions, and I used to, before I had children and sort of was out of the work market for ages, I worked in the civil service and everybody was in the union. You were expected to join the union. And they encouraged it. And now I work for the NHS and have done for the last 10 years. So few people, when you're allowed to join the union, they don't discourage you, although they don't have a nice relationship with them. Now, the modern sort of executives at the top, they don't really want the union to be strong at all. But people just don't join it. I'm amazed. And that's people my age, it's not just young people. People just, you say to them, oh, you're a member of Eunice, aren't you? No. Don't believe in the union. I mean, they just don't.
What's in it for them?
Oh yeah, I mean, if something terrible happens and you're suddenly ill or something, they do actually work for you. You're really stuck if you're on your own, but they just don't see it at all. And I don't know whether it's because unions have been so affected since Thatcher, or if it's just people just have no interest. I mean, it's a bit like why they, well, they're all the same. They all say. You say, well, what, are you really voting for? They're all the same.
Peter, question? Yeah.
I'm Peter Beck from Birmingham. I'd just like to ask what is the current nature of the organisations that I experienced when back in 1990 when they were called, I think, training providers. So if I became redundant, or in my case I just resigned, took a time before I actually got employed again. But I would agree with you then in 1990, these private training providers that were on offer, essentially, they didn't meet individual needs. So my experience, because of my previous employment, I knew what I wanted. The training, i.e. the sort of training that I could get, the work experience that I could get in order to get my, to enable me to have a good chance of getting my next employment. I mean, I don't know whether, for me it wasn't enforced, but I mean, presumably it would need to be if you wanted your benefits then as now. I don't know what the change is, whether it's very similar to how it was, or is it strict, much more physically, pressured on people.
Yeah, would you like to answer?
Yeah, I'll answer the questions in